Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Fanfiction Tapes. This is episode 14? Yeah?
Yeah, episode
Yeah.
14.
Here we go. And this month is our Worldbuilding Month. So, where better place to start than my own world? But first off, let's introduce some people. So, as I said, I'm Dylan, along with today's co-host.
Hi, I'm Jax. Within the world of Zinnade, I play Hera, the main character.
As well as...
Well, before that, I did play another character known as Jewel.
Maya,
we
need you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, you exist.
Yes, I do. It's me, Maya. I also play Kai, the resident war criminal and plumbing enjoyer.
And it's Ian, the producer, and I also play in Zinnade as Althea, the renegade warlock.
So here I have three of my players. We are a party of 6 now. Usually 5, but we've just added a new member. Yeah. So sort of a thing. How about you guys tell me about your introductions to Zinnade, each of you, before I go into how it came from me?
I guess I'll go first because I was the last to join. I actually joined a game that Jax was running several months prior because I'd been looking to get back into D&D. This was shortly before the pandemic started, as most of my IRL groups were fun but highly irregular. And then I just kind of kept accumulating more D&D games over time, like, I don't know what, like gay people do with pens.
Yep. You accumulate everything, though, so that makes sense.
Okay, what about you two, Ian, Jax?
Well, I know that way back in the before times of, what was it, 2018, 2019? You first posted in the Crow's Nest looking for players for a D&D group, and I, of course, jumped on that because I have never been in a D&D group that has been able to meet on a regular basis. And even at that time, my main IRL group was all of the roommates I was living with.
Yeah, for your knowledge, I believe it would have been late 2019.
Okay. So yeah, not too long before the pandemic, actually.
Yeah.
That changed things.
It was like 2 months, or even like a few weeks. I think it was like 3 weeks.
We'd been playing Jax's game for a while before the pandemic started.
No?
Yeah, for one, we did start with Dylan's game. That was the first to sort of start all of our groups.
Yeah. I thought your game started longer before the pandemic because we had the pandemic flatline.
No.
A little bit.
Jax, you were one of the first players in the Zinnade group, right? But that was as Jewel, right? Or did you join a little later?
No, Jax is a session 1.
I was one of the original characters within that. I did start with Jewel. He was kind of more of a joke character, which over time I sort of drifted away from. And speaking with Dylan, I then went on to create my next character, Hera, which I enjoy a lot more. I like to imagine the rest of the group also enjoys her. If finding her maybe a little insufferable at times.
Yeah, it took us a few months to get our main character.
So, for me, Zinnade started a little while before. I was in an RP text with my friend, Romka. And I was just like, I'll make a little setting for us. So I made the city of Tira on the island of Samara. And then I expanded from there. I drew on Paint, MS Paint, and I made the original map.
Original map is rough.
Oh, and then another friend of ours, moderator on a server we're all together, made a more updated map. And since then, I've created my own smaller maps. Instead of the entire world map, I have sub-regions. And those are the current maps we use. But yeah, that's where Zinnade originated from. A text RP where I went, I'll make this one city. and now it's...
We've never gone there.
That is true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we'll see what the future brings.
The tournament could be there.
It's not.
It's specifically not.
Shush.
So, let me just ask, in terms of Zinnade itself, which is spelled Zinnade, those curious, what is it that you all appreciate about it? Is it like the sort of, what's the unique aspects of the world that you're finding other places that you've seen in media or made yourself?
Well, what I think that the most interesting thing about is this also might be because it's the medium of D&D or a tabletop role-playing game, in that it's very interactive, both with the players and with the world. In a way, you're able to connect with it, affect it, and really change it. And as the DM, you are able to really bring that out.
High praise.
Mm-hmm.
Ian, Maya, do you guys have anything that makes you go, like, ooh, Zinnade?
I mean, aside from the fact that it's spending time with friends, I feel like there are certain stereotypes and conventions of the fantasy genre, particularly as it applies to Zinnade, that you are mildly subverting, and I kind of always appreciate that.
What is an example you can think of?
So a lot of D&D stereotypes stem from Tolkien, where like elves are always perfect, beautiful, good guys, and you kind of humanize them more. For instance, like Duke McSilver is definitely a bastard, and I also like it when there aren't necessarily always chaotic evil races. So the fact that you have a whole city of orcs that aren't, Evilsville. It's just people
Instead
with
they're
tusks.
communist.
Yes.
They are. Yeah, so, yeah, when I set out to make it, I didn't want to have, like, I don't believe that, you have a city of this and that race is like this. There are people and from these places and the people are like this, and not everyone, but it's about a culture, it's about religion, it's about what their country is run like. It's about their history and thinking about that instead of just going, oh, they were born evil.
Yeah, that is one of the unfortunate things about a lot of D&D and other fantasy media is there is a lot of problematic stereotypes about various real-life races that get converted into D&D.
When I talk about, like, elves, how I think of elves are, like, you'll either get, like, the condescending, like, one that looks down upon all of, like, the lesser races in terms of lifespan and goes, how could you ever know what it's like to be me, so on and so forth. And I also have the ones that are more insightful and I'll still worry about stuff like how, if I have a child with a human, I'm gonna outlive them, likely.
Yeah, I mean, the only kind of elven character that I would compare to a Tolkien elf wasn't actually an elf.
Who would that be?
Saint Alencius.
Saint Alencia is very much. She masqueraded as an elf. Yes, she was actually a golden dragon.
Yeah, one of our favorite NPCs.
I can't believe that speaking of Saint Alencia and that arc, I can't believe that Duke McSilver was the first elven bastard that came to mind when the lore master is right there.
The lore master is right there.
It's Law Master. Law.
Yeah, that's what I said, lore master.
This is a joke that they have been gaslighting me for about 2 years now.
I don't know where this gaslighting is coming from. It's just what it is.
How dare you?
I will go to the bat here, up to bat, when it comes towards some of those racial stereotypes. I kind of grew up along more of those pieces of media where you have your elves here and your dwarves here. And yes, that can be problematic, and I don't think it's entirely realistic. However, I think it's just like a staple of the genre that, when done well, can kind of give a flavor and, cultural history to some people that can be kind of fun.
I do have some of those elements, but I think that was something that happened in the past in Zinnade. People moved beyond that. It became, cultures and nations, and once the gods went, people went, I guess instead of just being around the people who are similar to me, we'll find people who can work together.
I think a lot of it is a time thing, because over time peoples and cultures will mix and clash and conflict and all that, and eventually you will get to an integrated society where you can just see practically anyone walking around.
So when we speak about Zinnade, and I want to talk more about the world and what you guys like about it, so obviously our campaign is set on the continent of Epeth. Epeth has 4 sort of primary nations and a little archipelago area with a few islands. So, do you want to tell me what you like about maybe the 3 you've been to? Because you have been to the archipelago, but there's little to say about that. So, who here would like to talk about the Kingdom of Ceres?
Well, I suppose I will do that, being as my character originates from Ceres and has become a knight over time. So I do really enjoy Ceres. It really makes you feel that you're in that medieval fantasy, and one of the things that I sort of might be jumping a little bit ahead with is that you could very much compare it to Westeros from Game of Thrones or Song of Ice and Fire, which, if I remember correctly, is one of your major influences.
Pretty much, yeah.
Now, I think in a little bit here we will see a lot more of that. I think there's going to be a lot of political maneuvering. We just finished a major arc, but the arc before it, which was the first one, involved a fat, drunk king that spent all of the kingdom's wealth on partying and frivolous nonsense, and we were helping the princess.
Also, he was an asshole.
Well, that was implied. But yeah, we were helping his daughter to attempt to overthrow him. Things naturally kind of shifted around, but no, there was a lot of the themes that you could see in Ice and Fire where power lies where people think it lies, right?
Yeah, pretty much. It's an aspect I always want to talk about. It's like, who is actually the person in charge? Was it the Fat King? Was it his advisors because he didn't care? Was it his mistresses? Who was really ruling? I mean, they used him, or he was just doing it himself. But obviously, when it comes to that, people have different views and all this. And King Hansen as a character, he's a terrible person. I've talked about the history, and I've shown you guys some of the history about him. His father died alone with him from choking on his food. And this was when Hansen was 13. And I don't outright say it, but it can be described as, like, this 13-year-old kid killed his father. Like, it can be taken that way if you want to.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, talking about Sarah's, how about we speak of your favorite person in the Sarah's kingdom? Tell me about my DMPC who traveled with you for a long time, Elizabeth Sarah's. Tell me a little about her, Jax, before we move on.
Oh, boy. Well, the relationship between her and my character, Hera, is... Well, I think the thing to understand is that my character came from a dukedom where her family had been taken advantage of, her brother had been kidnapped and brain controlled into an assassin. And as such, Hera has might be more accurate to say had, an intense distrust and hatred for government and royalty in specific. She's largely trying to get on Princess Elizabeth's good side in order to try and, get her, should she be put in power, to help her with her own problems. So, over time, it largely became, there's a lot of friction there, to say the least. I'm sure Ian here will have a different description of Elizabeth. A lot different character interaction there. Elizabeth, in her own way, has her own sense of justice and trying to right things, to kind of clean up corruption, overthrew her father. A lot of that. Yeah.
Yeah, so a quick thing about Liz you guys might know, may know. The way I write Liz is pretty much this girl who grew up in a very hostile environment. Her family was constantly under threat from various mistresses or people who would have been better off if there wasn't an heir and a queen consort. And that molded her to hate corruption, because that's what she saw it all as, is corruption. And she eventually was attacked and killed her attackers, and then saved her mother and sibling from attackers, and they ran away, and that's where eventually you guys met them.
Mm-hmm.
What she is a character who very much was made in a very difficult place, and had to learn that the world is sort of, you don't have to do all the corruption taking out on your own, and there might be more important things, and that's eventually what it became, is she assisted instead of going after the throne, but with you guys, she went along and instead of taking that out, took out a conspiracy, a dark god trying to be summoned.
Mm-hmm. We got kind of distracted, as D&D players tend to do. Yeah, you laugh.
I do laugh because I'm usually the one getting distracted.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you guys, alongside her, instead stopped that instead of going for the throne. And eventually that meant that a different story was that people in the kingdom who hated King Hansen went and found this guy who had a very small claim to the throne. He he's basically like a Luke Skywalker. You know, he's just some farm kid, but he had like, oh, if we go to this queen, her third son who never became king and died, well, if we trace that line, it leads to like this guy.
Uh-huh. So far, it seems to be going well.
Monarchy is a wacky system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We'll see how long that lasts. Be prepared, DM.
So, Inamaya, do you guys want to pick between the sort of Union Republic Glaiva and the nation states of Twagos?
Maya, you go first. I'll talk about whichever one you don't want.
I think Glaver's probably the most appropriate one for me to talk about, given all the problems I personally have caused there.
Yeah,
Well-
they were all you.
Not all of them, but
Mm-hmm.
I remember having to leave a couple of towns in a hurry. What's kind of interesting is my character was, Kai, was hanging out and spending a lot of time in Glaver before she met the party. Not necessarily causing too many issues there. And my character isn't very invested in this continent. She's on exile from her homeland on basically the other side of the world, hoping to eventually get back in. And her interactions with it are often less with investment with the area and more the people she knows directly. So her ties to Glaver were basically through the party. And that meant we've caused a few problems, maybe collapsed the economy of a region.
This is what happens when you work with mob bosses.
It seemed like the thing to do at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Also, me and another player were chanting heist episode.
Hey, it was fun at the time.
It was
had
fun.
consequences.
It was fun.
Yeah.
And the consequences were good for you, weren't they, DM? It meant you got to make an entire second arc.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, this second arc wouldn't have happened at all without that horrible decision.
But to talk a little bit about Glaver, Glaver is a union of three sort of smaller nations. So there's the Danvanesh region, which were nomadic people who lived in a desert and practiced a lot of fishing. You had the Kraxon, who live in the jungle region and had to deal with all these monsters and weird creatures and cultists. And you had the people who are now called Glaver, but they're descendant of the same people of the island dynasty in the south, which are the Lyonese. But they are now known as Glaver. So they three came into a union and are basically, they each have their own individual leader, but it's sort of in a more democratic sense and all this. You know, they try and give more representation to people. Whereas to the north, you will have Zinnade, and pretty much a monarchy with dukedoms who are vassals of that, king, and so on and so forth. So Glaver is an opportunity to deal with a more bureaucratic thing, different elements showing how while corruption within a kingdom is done with people influencing one person, Glaver is people taking the system and using it. So it's a different system than a monarchy where you only have to influence one person, and that one person is influenced by many different things. It's a system being influenced by so many people for their own advantages. So, Ian, how about you talk about the city-states of Twagos?
Twagos, yes. So let's see. Twagos, we've got, what is it? Wallsville, Zinnade, and remind me on the... Udquadid, yes.
And the other one.
Yeah, I think we maybe went to Udquadid once.
Yeah.
We did.
We only had a brief stopover there. Zinnade is, I think, where the story depending on how you look at it, either really got started or really went off the rails.
Yeah, that's when I started to play Hera.
Yeah, that's where we got introduced to Hera. We got involved with the Vulture King plot and the
Lawmaster.
The Lawmaster, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That was the first government we overthrew.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The first one so far.
I think I speak for most of the players when I say that Zinnade is our favorite city. It's because it was really well built. It had a lot of good NPCs all doing their own thing, and we really got to see the effect that we had on the world there.
Also, for quite a few of us, it was the first big city we really got to go to.
Mm-hmm.
'Cause I think that was the first stop we made after I joined.
You were in Zont, you had a quick stop over in Nagabo, and then you spent a long time in Zinnade, Worldbuilding.
Even before Maya had joined, we'd only been to some very small places.
So, and obviously the city-states are each a bit different. These are more, Zinnade was Elven, Urquhart was Orcish, and Worldbuilding is like a mixture of cultures, whatever. But the idea was, sort of, they're not completely these things. And how they each had different systems. So obviously, there's a democratic mayor in Wallsville. Zinnade had a saint leading it, so a religious sort of theocracy mixing with something else. And Urquhart was, communist in nature, but they still practiced democracy. So then, the main focus was Zinnade, because what happened is, they had been ruled by a saint, Alencia Savar, since their founding. It was their founder. What happens when that founder then doesn't have the magic to keep up their thing anymore and has to leave? Mm-hmm. Well, how does one deal with an 800-year-old, ruler suddenly disappearing? Basically a god ruler.
Mm-hmm. Definitely not our fault.
The second in command takes over, and whereas that god ruler previously could keep them in check, the biases start to show a lot more. They start ostracizing half-elves, believing them impure, showing sort of racial tensioning that way. And it eventually led to said ruler having to be overthrown by you guys and installing a council.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I love about Twagos. Twagos was about these smaller stories, but we spent a lot of time on them. It was this one city and how this one city got affected and what the other two big places in them fought. Nothing else mattered at that point, really. You had the bigger overarching plot, but the main focus was Zinnade and what the other two will do to help us with it. And that was your guys' goal, was to stabilize Zinnade. Nothing else mattered.
Well, also, kicking that Lawmaster guy out, he was dick.
Uh-huh.
But you could have just left him. You had other stuff to do.
We did, and this was the first time where we said, this seems important, we should do this, because we had left a city within the Kraxon region known as Zont, where there's a number of things going on with cultists in the jungle. We still have no idea what's down there. I'm still expecting a elder god to be summoned somewhere down there, and we have to deal with it.
Didn't we end up releasing a mind flayer in that region?
Yeah, but that was a lot later.
That was a lot more recently.
Well, yeah, that's not gonna help matters, though.
Yeah, we
look. It could end up being a situation where the Mind Flayer and the Elder God are at odds, and they take each other out.
Yeah, it'll be fine.
Maybe he'll be helpful. We were nice to him.
Yeah, we were.
Yeah, but those are the three main ones. So just compare this to other fantasies you guys have seen before. How does Zinnade hold up, compare, do things different, do things better, does things worse, if that is possible.
Well, I sort of got a couple here, and touched a little bit on it earlier. And that's to start with the two places that I believe Dylan has drawn the most for from inspiration. The first being A Song of Ice and Fire with Westeros. Like I said, there's a lot of interconnectedness and political machinations and such. The other one would be Exandria from Critical Role, which I believe was where Dylan first sort of got into the idea of D&D.
I played D&D years ago, and I always was a world builder, like I made worlds, but I didn't have any vehicle to use them. Zinnade was sort of like, so Matt has Exandria. Why don't I just make something?
Mm-hmm. Right. And there are definitely some spots where I can see, all right, yeah, I can see some of those fingerprints here and there. And I like that. I like a lot of the inspiration that you've taken and sort of used. One thing that I'll sort of say is that I think that perhaps could be thought on a little bit more for world building is with D&D 5th edition, or wherever you might take this in the future, you have access to so many different races and magic and rules that really defy what we know in our world or a medieval world. And I think that might be something that Zinnade could use a little bit more spice with, right? Just like question, okay, how would society be affected with these various magics?
Mm-hmm.
And for that, you can look at other fantasy worlds.
Alrighty. What about you, Maya?
My relationship with Zinnade as a world is it's kind of this step in between what, as I understand, is more typical for TTRPG worlds and what you're going to see when you're reading a book or watching a movie. Because it's... I mean, I grew up on Tolkien. I had his books around as a kid. I read the Aragon books when I was younger as well. And I read some of Sanderson's stuff pretty early. These are all cases that are kind of pretty well known for fairly expansive world. And they are very well established. There's not much you can do to them when you engage with those worlds. And this was one of my first major D&D games. And I was very scared to touch the world. And or not to touch the world, to change the world from the way you had it.
Mm-hmm.
Which is different from the way I would say I now interact with fantasy worlds in TTRPGs and otherwise, but that's also because I read a lot more fanfic than I used to. There is... I'm not certain how to describe this, but it's... When you say fantasy, and if you say D&D, what a lot of people are instantly going to think of is high fantasy swords and sorcery.
Mm-hmm.
Medieval period at the absolute latest, and a lot of the other trappings of stereotypical high fantasy. There's a castle, there's a dragon, there's a knight, there's a princess. And actually, we have all of those, but not in the usual ways.
What, are you saying that Hera is not your typical knight?
I am in fact saying that.
Go figure.
I do see what you're saying, yeah. Like, the dragons you've interacted with, you've only fought a couple, and they were hungry beasts. Like, let's go mess up this guy. Other dragons you've met was one masquerading as a saint, one who was basically like, don't touch my stuff and pay me tribute, and you can go past. And
I gave him a rock.
and one who was like, all right, you want to, make a deal with me? Like, I'll protect this land. Just don't have people come into mine.
Yeah, no, Zinnade is... I suppose I should, clarify a little bit. Zinnade is definitely different in that it isn't what you might consider, that standard fantasy. I'm just saying that it is large enough that you might be able to, put a little bit in there,
So that is actually not at all what I was leading up to when I was talking about all of that.
All right.
I have a gun.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was leading up to. It's technology-wise, it is very different. If you're familiar, listeners, with the Magician Master and Magician Apprentice books by Raymond E. Feist and that whole series, I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head. That one is, I believe, actually based on the plot of his D&D games with his friends. And it is very sword and sorcery.
Mm-hmm.
Although admittedly heavier on the sorcery than the swords. And Zinnade is not that. Well, for one, we have a flying boat. But the general technological level is different. And that's a very neat thing. It's been fun to engage and see that. And also run into some of how the technology levels at different points in the world are different.
Yeah, that's definitely one of them. Chimera comes from a place that, well, it has plumbing, guns, and even plastic, which we just saw a little bit ago. Whereas where we've been spending our time, you don't see anything really more technologically advanced than a horse-drawn cart.
We've encountered a few people who have managed to get their hands on guns.
Mm-hmm.
Lately,
but
yes,
those
that's how I
hurt.
got one.
Yeah.
Yes. But it seems like a lot of the technological progress in this region is really being driven by Chimerir's presence.
Oh, that's going to cause so many problems down the road.
I am
and-
here to cause problems.
And there's an opportunity for a player.
Chimerir is here to bring the Industrial Revolution and its consequences.
As all artificers are wont to do.
It's the equivalent of someone from someone from the 18th century or someone from that, probably 1700s to the early 1900s being sent back to the 800s, They know how to make stuff and will just be like, can we stop mining this? Because this will be very useful. And I know how to make your boats better. I know how to make other stuff better. Let's talk about advancing quickly here. And yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those interesting things. Because in world as you've set up, there are just so many different areas and regions. There's so much that you can just fill on the map to where you can put in anything you want. Because we've already spoken of just one continent and its 3 subregions, and well, we barely touched the surface of them, but they are very clearly different.
It's kind of funny the way Chimera has turned out and the impact she's had on the world. Very different from what was originally intended and how I based her off of.
Yes, you carried around a pot of grass, feeding it some alchemical solution.
Yes, well, so originally I designed that character keeping in mind one of my friends from high school who is an agricultural engineer now. And I believe around the time I joined, he'd been talking more about it. I was like, you know what, that could be a neat way to work stuff that isn't really what I do into this character, because I decided I wanted to do an alchemist artificer and then built the rest of the character from there. And at the time, I wasn't really doing much chemistry in the day-to-day. So I was like, yeah, it doesn't really mesh with what I'm doing. So I went to look at other fields and I pulled that in, and then it's just kind of fallen by the wayside for a while.
Mm-hmm. It's the funniest thing, since the reason that you were experimenting on that grass is you were trying to find a solution for better crops in a elevated and arid area, correct?
Yes, because...
And my character comes from a farming background in a high elevated arid area. And you never asked her about that.
A D&D
That
moment right there, guys.
is hilarious.
Look me in the face and tell me you think Chimera would realize that.
Oh, she absolutely would not. It's totally in character,
Mm-hmm.
but it's still hilarious. Dramatic irony.
Imagine that you'd be smart enough, but I guess you proved me wrong.
Chimera doesn't people well.
No,
Which is really funny, because her 3 highest stats are intelligence, charisma, and wisdom in that order.
Chimera is just built different, okay?
On the subject of comparing to other fantasy settings and how the presence of magic can influence technological developments, I think that if we want to explore that in the world of Zinnade going forward, Cosmere is a good place to look for inspiration. Because the 2 big series there, Mistborn and Stormlight Archive, are both settings where we're getting to see technological development that incorporates this their relevant
magics.
Yeah.
Although, I feel I should say, for Starlight Archives, I think it's technically the other way around. It's scientific advancements from magic.
Yeah. Stormlight Archive in particular has magic producing technological advancements. You get to see that a lot in Rhythm of War, with Navani rapidly advancing Fabrial technology. You also kind of see that we'll be getting a lot more look at eras of technological development in the Mistborn setting going forward as well, because that is jumping forward decades to centuries every time he starts a new series in that setting. Because we had the original Mistborn trilogy was a enforced medieval stasis thing, and then we jump forward 300 years, and the magic has gotten kind of different. Weaker, you could say.
I think rather than weaker, necessarily diluted.
Yeah. But at the same time, that means that more people have access to different combinations of magic, and technology is starting to be developed to harness the magic. And the next leap forward in that setting, we know, is going to be more of a cyberpunk setting. So we went from medieval stasis to steampunk Wild West. Next, we're going to be seeing cyberpunk and eventually space age. And we've seen some glimpses of that era in some of the other short stories and side novels. And it's going to be really interesting to see how exactly the magic gets incorporated into the technology. So it'll be interesting to see then if we can take some inspiration for that for developing in Zinnade.
I mean, we'll see. The technology aspect, I'm focusing that primarily on one continent. But that continent will definitely have a lot of stuff. But Camry, as a character, you know, it does influence the technology and everything. And yeah, it's also about that ancient technology, the stuff that is more advanced, stuff but that became in between world-ending wars, you know, and what Camry has been able to reverse engineer that stuff.
Right. I do love that trope of ancient technology.
It's really hard to not use. I've used it in my own game. It's to what I like to imagine is a great effect.
But yeah, it's also just a thing when I talk about world building is high-level magic users must be like, in like most world settings, must be like some of the crappiest people because they don't use their power that much to help. You know, It's like you've got like a spell that can, you know, make like crops for like a mile, and you don't do that to help solve poverty. It's like, well, I gotta go beat this dragon. It's like, okay, thanks, but the dragon only appears like once you kill it. Can't you do that? Lich. It's like, great.
Yeah, that is a very interesting thing that you sort of gotta tackle when you make some of these things and you make such characters. And it's like, you have to be like, okay, why don't they do this? Are they an asshole? Or, like you said, the world is constantly under attack from 4 different angles of reality-ending threats.
Yeah, so magic users use more to keep the world from being destroyed than change it. So, yeah. But it would be interesting to see someone play a wizard who tried to change, you know, the world, use wizardry not to defeat stuff, but to make it better.
Interesting concept. I might have to think about that next campaign.
Something relevant is, I think, Jim Butcher's Dresden Files. I'm sorry, you two, you get to sit through more hyperfixation hour.
I'll just sit here.
There is a character in that series named Mab, based off of... Actually, I'm not certain the particular origin of Mab. Most people are likely familiar with Queen Titania from one of Shakespeare's plays. In the Dresden Files, Mab is kind of the counterpart to Titania. She's this ancient fae being that is, at first glance, fucking terrible. Has a lot of power, uses it in ways that hurt people Harry cares about. But as the series progresses, you learn that Mab only has that power because she is constantly fighting back against those world-ending threats. It's neat.
Okay.
Neat.
So we've done our comparisons. Now it's the moment you three have been waiting for. Ask me some questions. What do you want to know?
Well, I know I'm not going to get any straight answer out of this.
Yeah, of course. Anything that's really spoilerific, I won't tell you guys. But, no. You could ask me about moments you missed or other stuff like that, and I can explain. Like, what would have happened if we did this? or something, you know?
What is going on with the cults in the jungle?
They've been around a long time. They're trying to summon, they like sort of demigod sort of thing, and they kidnap people from like when I described Zon to you guys over there, they kidnap people and they mutilate them to try and summon. But legitimately, it's sort of the blind leading the blind. No one actually knows what to do. So it's creating more of a. It's sort of like if you talk about, I don't know, a religion in the modern day that does something in preparing for something that never happens. Is where someone on the outside goes, "Why are you doing this?" And them going, "It's our religion," you know.
All right.
But could they, if they did actual research and stop being just general jungle cultists who are more of a, warring with lizard folk and kidnapping random travelers instead of doing actual conspiracy? Sure.
Okay. One of the things that you have teased for a while is there is a mountain range that divides the continent of Epith horizontally. Ooh, took me a second there. And within this mountain range, any time that we seem to go through it, there is some draconid something or another that gives us issue, and we need our friendly sorcerer to wrestle it into the ocean. That's one of the things that I'm wondering about. I really feel like it's a lot of setup because, like, the very early lore for this continent is that it's been ruled by a tyrannical red dragon. So we've made the assumption that these are all draconids which are red, we think it's some remnants from that, and right now we're just waiting for his descendants to show up and destroy everything.
Yeah. So, Ulador, the Crimson Tyrant, as I describe him, he was born a long time ago, before he became the ruler. Because, they were gods, they were dragon gods, there were all these other big, scary things that died during the War of the Gods. And he's left behind like, oh, I'm the strongest thing around now? Cool. Mine. But he was born in the Valley of Tuagos, and the Valley of Tuagos was once a super mega volcano. Like, you look at that, it used to be a volcano.
That explains the crater-like shape.
Yeah, magical stuff have changed, but it's still just historically many dragons will link back. That's where they were born. That's where their parent was born. That's where, the chromatic dragon was. Whatever. And it's like, I don't want to say, but you can think of various cultures where it's like, oh, I'm a Catholic, maybe I'll go to the Vatican. I'm Jewish, let's go to Israel. It's sort of like that in a dragon sense, that dragons think, okay, especially dragons from a certain part of the world will be like, that valley there is a great place for me to layer up, build a nest, whatever. Even if you look at, like, Miyu, the dragon who Hera has to deal with. He is right next to that mountain range. Saint Alincia, a dragon, was within the volcano, in the former volcano area. Dragons congregate to that area. And that's really the thing. And you see a lot of dragons around that area, and, sort of, you won't find them in the north unless, like, they're white. And that's sort of the only thing. Is like, cold-based dragons will be the only ones you'll probably find out and about. Because the way that's built and the historical importance it has to dragons and their culture and their societies or whatever was, this was the kingdom of the fire dragons. The green dragons were over here, the whatever. And that's where that comes from. It's the important place for their culture.
Okay, but there's still some red dragons in there that are going to come and destroy us all.
I never said that.
You never didn't say it.
Any other questions? It could be about any various of NPCs.
I got a couple questions.
Mm-hmm.
Well, first one. What might have happened if Zarhal had not put a cap in that crime lord's ass?
So Zarhal is one of our players, and he, when they eventually caught the crime lord who had kidnapped the various members of the party's family, he decided there's no point in trying to bargain. I'll just kill her.
This was after she had said, I have hostages. If you don't let me walk out if you're alive, there are instructions to kill them.
Basically, she was half bluffing. If they had been able to figure out she was dead, hostages would have died. But they didn't really have a way to do so, because of certain things that had happened. So usually, a creature such as Granny Malquest, who is Althea, Ian's character's patron. She could usually see through Althea, kind of. But with steps that... things that have happened to Althea across the story has made it much more difficult for Malquest to do so. And with all that, she wasn't able to confirm or deny the crime lords know whether they was alive or not. So when you managed to sneak in, it was really easy because they didn't know what was doing, and because you had killed the crime lord members who had suspected were kind of like, yo, I'm not staying around. I was here for the boss. They paid me. I'm out. You could have taken her in, which I think might have been the worst choice, or you could have just let her walk away. It's basically, did you want more leverage, or did you want, it depended a lot on different things. I had plans for each way. But when you chose, or Zarhal chose for you, I'm going to kill her. It made me just further go into that route.
Yeah, I mean, I was fully planning on letting her walk out the door and then letting her step right into the hands of the guard who'd come with us.
Mm-hmm.
Because Kyber is smart enough to go, well, I let you go. They didn't.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that she would have taken that.
Probably not.
Anything else?
What might happen if maybe after this tournament arc or even after that, Kai returns home?
That is something we'll have to see. Unfortunately, I cannot spoil you on that, but I will say it's been quite a while since Kaime has been home. We're talking about 3-4 years now?
Longer than that, I think. It was 4 years. I think, yeah, it was 4 years at the start of the campaign.
So we're probably looking at about 6 now. And right now, you've just saved 2 of your siblings, so we'll see how maybe they'll think about it.
Yeah, which I suppose for listeners who don't play, my character got exiled after one of her inventions accidentally detonated and took off someone's arm.
Mm-hmm.
So, Jax, Ian, any other questions?
I had one a second ago, but it has escaped me.
Same.
You two are brilliant.
Thank you.
Why don't we move on to your advice to world builders?
So my advice would always be to make big and then go down, or to start small and go out. Choose one of 2 ways. I think for starting a world, I think you make the one city, and then you say that city is here, and where it is in, and what the continent is, and then you go back smaller, you zoom in again. I think it's good to go small to big, and then back from big down to small. I think that's a perfect way to go about it. And then look at other stuff. Look at history. Look at culture. Look at unique rules. Unique experiences. Religious sites. Historical, incidents that have affected the land of the world. We think of, like, rivers over time have changed. You think of, different monuments that are built. Even ones like, what will people think of the Washington Monument if the world got wiped out? Or what would people think of, Mount Rushmore? Like, there's just 4 faces in this rock. Why? And that's been my advice. In terms of character work and how you make characters for that world, then I'd say it's important to look at history and look at how, society expects them to be, and whether they embrace society or reject society. What makes them the way they are when you're building a world. And that's so important, and you have to think of the organizations that exist. That's one of my favorite things to do, is to make organizations people who are not the rulers but have a say. In Twagos, we have the Enchanted Variety. They're a group of mages who basically scout out and look for magical talent and build them up. And, they take some magical responsibility in the valley. But that would be my advice, is just focus in on an aspect, grow it, and then maybe move on to the next, or look back down and see, okay, what's the minutia here? What's the tiny detail?
Nice. That's I gotta say that's generally how I've worked when building my own homebrew setting.
Yeah, I think that is going to make next week's episode, when we have Steamed on again to talk about some other world building stuff, very interesting, and the differences in between your 2 philosophies on world building.
Okay. Ian, anything in the mailbag?
Nope, we don't have any mail yet. So I just like to remind our listeners that if there is anything that you want to talk to us about, or anything you want to have us talk about on the podcast, you can email us at fanfictapes@gmail.com. We also have a Twitter. Maya monitors that. Maya, do we have anything on anybody reaching out to us on Twitter?
We do not, unfortunately.
Bummer. Well, tweet at us. Our username there is @fanfictiontapes. Dylan, do we have a prompt this week?
Yes, my prompt is for you to create a location, a city, a town, a unique religion, and an organization that exists within a world. You have to explain why they're important or why they're not important, what they do, and how it affects the local area or the larger area. Just tell us, what do they do? But I'm very much looking forward to any submissions we get out of that. I expect homework from all 3 of you.
No.
Jax, you send me stuff anyway.
True.
I'm going to a conference on Monday.
I have so much other homework already.
Anyway, guys, this has been our first episode in the month of world building here at the Fanfiction Tapes. I have been Dylan. My co-host has been
Maya.
Hey, it's me, Jax. Yeah, both of us.
Yeah, Jax and Maya. And our producer.
I have been Ian, our producer, as always. All right. Thanks for listening. Until next time, bye.